Hello, I am Dr. Sarah Watson. I'm a senior clinical child and adolescent psychologist, and I am the founder and managing director at Totally Psyched. And we're a private mental health clinic specialising in working with children and adolescents. So an important thing to understand when we think about ADHD is executive functions. So as we've talked about earlier, and hopefully you've checked out that video, the part that is affected by ADHD is what's known as the prefrontal cortex in the frontal lobe. Now, this has particular functions, some of which have been outlined earlier, but as a recap, it includes the control center of the brain. So attentional control, emotional control, behavioral control, understanding consequences, and motor control. Oh, and impulse control. Now, not only is it the control center of the brain, but how that is controlled is something called executive functioning. So I like to think of it like your frontal lobe here has a little wee conductor in it that is conducting all of the orchestra that is the brain. So it goes through and it's saying, do this a bit more, do this a bit less, do this a bit more, do this a bit less, in terms of behavior and emotions, but also in terms of goal and task completion. So if you check out the slide, what this tells you is it kind of takes together all of the things that are required to get a goal or a task or an activity completed. Now usually all of these are the nemesis to the ADHD brain because they are located in the prefrontal cortex of the frontal lobe, which is an area that isn't just quite up to snuff in terms of performance. So what does it include? It includes getting on task, getting activated to start off with. So many people with ADHD struggle with being able to just get started. And you know what? It's a real thing. It's a neurological thing. It's not a lazy thing. It's not a I can't be bothered thing. It's genuinely really hard thing. Next, in order to be able to do things, you have to get started, right? Then you need to be able to focus, and you need to be able to keep your focus on that particular thing. So not get distracted by other things, or get distracted and then be able to come back. You also need to be able to keep your focus going, even though it might be boring, or there might be other things that you think, oh, I'd much rather be doing or thinking about. Then you also need to keep the effort and the motivation up. And you have to deal with frustration. The frustration that can come potentially if it is boring, if it's hard, if it's kind of like not going the way that you expected it would go. So your expectations have had to change and modify. That can be really, really tough to manage emotionally. Then you also have to remember everything that you're doing. So what was the plan? What were you going to do? What is the task? And then finally, you need to be able to reflect and look at what you're doing, how you started it, right through to ending it, and then going back and editing. All of those things get us from the start of a task or a goal to the end of a task or a goal. Goal after goal after goal. Now, when that is a nemesis, as it is with ADHD, that makes it really tough. Now, one last thing that I need to add to that is the concept of time. So if we get that task completion can be quite tricky, then there's also an overlay to that, which is those with ADHD quite often have a very poor concept of time. What do I mean by that? I mean generally underestimating how long things will take. So often those with ADHD may run late, or they might procrastinate because doing the task isn't exactly the most exciting thing in the world, especially if it's an assignment, unless it's a really loved assignment or subject. So then you get procrastination, putting it off potentially, highly common. But also you can then get overlaid with that an underestimation of how long it takes. So then what happens? You get a lot of those, especially I anticipate at university students, who may turn in their work late because they've underestimated how long it would take and left it to the last minute. So there just isn't enough time to get it all done. So what can be helpful for those with ADHD and executive functioning challenges? Well, help with being able to organize the task or the assignment during their tutoring sessions. Also, to get an understanding from others about how long it's likely to take. So that in all is executive functioning and some top tips to help.